The wind had been worrying the valley since dusk, slipping through the bare cottonwoods and scraping its nails along the side of the farmhouse as if asking to be let in. By the time night settled fully, the cold had teeth. It crept under doors, into joints, into the quiet places a man didn't know he still felt. The farmer stood on the porch for a long moment before stepping down, pulling his coat tighter, listening to the land breathe the way it always did before a hard freeze. This was not a big farm. It never had been. 40 uneven acres pressed between low hills and a frozen creek. The kind of place that survived only because it had learned to endure. The barn sat a short walk from the house, hunched and weather-darkened, its boards scarred by decades of storms. Light leaked through its cracks in thin amber lines, trembling with each gust. Inside, one horse shifted her weight, the sound of it heavy and deliberate, like a door being closed gently but with finality. He had built that barn with his brother 30 years earlier, back when their hands were quicker and their backs didn't argue. The brother was gone now. City life, debts, a silence that had stretched so long it might as well have been permanent. Others had left too. His wife, first to illness and then to memory. Friends who sold off their land piece by piece. What remained was this: the cold, the animals, and the work that still demanded to be done no matter how man felt about it. He crossed the yard slowly, boots crunching through snow that had already begun to crust over. The sky was low and colorless, stars dimmed by cloud, the moon nothing more than a smudge. Somewhere far off, a fence wire sang. The sound followed him, thin and lonely, until the barn door loomed up in front of him, its latch rimed with ice. Inside, the giant mare lifted her head at once. She was old for her size, a broad-backed draft with a coat the color of wet stone and eyes that missed very little. She had been calm when he brought her in before nightfall, calm in a way that felt earned. He trusted that kind of calm. It came from having survived things. He moved along the wall, checking the water, spreading more hay. His breath rose and vanished. The barn smelled of straw and warmth and animal life, a small island of shelter carved out of the winter. He told himself this was enough. It had to be. Feed prices were climbing. Repairs waited. The ledger on the kitchen table was already thin with bad news. He could not afford surprises. That was when he heard it. At first it sounded like the wind again, a break in its rhythm. He paused, one hand resting on the pitchfork handle, and listened. The mare's ears tipped forward, not alarmed, attentive. The sound came again, soft, uneven, almost swallowed by the night. A breath, then another. He stepped back toward the door and opened it a few inches. Cold rushed in, sharp as broken glass. Beyond the circle of barn light, the yard lay empty, snow rippling faintly under the wind. He was about to shut the door when movement caught his eye, low to the ground, hesitant. A shape, then another. He leaned forward, squinting into the dark. 8 small forms stood just beyond the reach of the light, clustered close, their legs trembling. Foals, too young to be out here alone. Their coats were dull with frost, manes stiff, eyes wide and reflecting like bits of glass. They did not cry out. They simply stood there, as if waiting for something they barely understood. The farmer felt a tightness settle behind his ribs. This made no sense. There were no breeding farms close enough for young stock to wander this far, not in this weather. And yet here they were, breathing hard, steam pouring from their nostrils, the cold already winning. Behind him, the mare took a step forward. Her hooves struck the packed earth with a muted thud. She lowered her head, not in threat but in focus. The foals shifted at the sound, inching closer to the doorway, their hooves skidding slightly on the ice. He knew what opening that door wider would mean. Risk, trouble, questions he did not have the money or energy to answer. He also knew what closing it would mean. He stood there, the wind pressing at his back, the barn light stretching out toward those small, shivering bodies like a fragile promise. For a moment, no one moved. Man, mare, and foals held in the same breath. Then the farmer reached out and pushed the door open. The door groaned as it swung wider, its hinges protesting the cold. The light spilled out across the snow, pale and unsteady, and for a moment the foals did not move. They stood pressed together, ribs showing beneath their winter coats, legs thin as fence posts, eyes fixed on the man as if he might change his mind at any second. He did not speak to them. Words felt too large for what was happening. Instead, he stepped back, making space, and set the pitchfork down against the wall. The barn breathed behind him, warm and alive. Straw shifted softly under the mare's hooves as she moved closer, her great body a dark, steady presence. One of the foals took a step forward. It was the smallest, a pale chestnut with a blaze gone crooked down its face. Its hoof slipped, and it nearly went down before catching itself. The others followed then, not in a rush, but with the careful urgency of creatures who had already learned how easily the world could knock them over. They crossed the threshold one by one, shoulders brushing, heads low, as if apologizing for the space they took. Cold came with them. So did the smell of it, raw and metallic, clinging to their coats. The farmer watched closely, ready to move if the mare so much as pinned an ear. She didn't. She lowered her head instead, nostrils flaring as she drew in their scent. Her tail swished once, slow and deliberate, stirring dust and chaff. Then she stood still, planted like a wall. The foals huddled together just inside the door, their sides heaving. Ice cracked softly where it melted off their fetlocks and dropped onto the packed earth. The farmer felt something twist in his chest, a recognition he hadn't expected. He knew that posture. He had worn it himself once, standing somewhere he did not belong, waiting to be told whether he could stay. He moved again, slowly, scooping hay with his hands and spreading it in a wide circle, keeping his body turned slightly away so as not to crowd them. Hunger overruled fear. One muzzle dipped, then another. Soon there was the soft, frantic sound of chewing, the way animals eat when they don't trust the food to last. Only then did he see how bad it was. The way their coats lay flat and lifeless. The sharp lines at their hips. A faint rawness around one neck where a rope had rubbed too long. These weren't animals that had simply wandered off. These were animals that had been pushed out. The mare shifted again, stepping closer until she stood among them. She did not nudge or bite. She simply placed herself there, broad and immovable, her head lowered, her eye on the door. The foals leaned into her without thinking, small bodies pressing against her legs and chest, as if she were the thing they had been looking for all along. The farmer swallowed. He had seen horses bomb before, but this was different. This was not instinct alone. It had intention in it. He fetched buckets, broke the ice with his boot heel, filled them from the pump until his fingers burned. He set them down one by one, spacing them out so there would be no fighting. The foals drank greedily, water spilling down their chins. The mare waited until they were done before taking her turn. Somewhere in the barn, a board popped as the temperature dropped further. Outside, the wind rose again, battering the walls. The farmer closed the door at last, sliding the bolt home. The sound echoed, final and heavy. There would be no pretending now that this was temporary. He leaned back against the wall and looked at them properly. 8 lives all at once. 8 problems he could not solve by morning. He thought of the ledger, of the calls he would have to make, of the way people talked when something unexpected landed on a man already close to the edge. He thought, too, of what it would say about him if he walked them back out into the night. The mare lifted her head and looked at him then, really looked, her dark eyes steady. He had the sudden, unsettling sense that she was measuring him, weighing whatever it was she had seen in him when she chose this place. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. The word hung in the air, thin but binding. He spent the rest of the night in the barn, dozing on a stool between feedings, listening to the rhythm of breathing settle and slow. Each time he woke, the foals were still there. Each time, the mare stood guard, unmoving. By the time the first gray hint of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the boards, the storm had eased. The cold remained, but something else had taken hold in its place. A sense that whatever had followed those foals here had not done so by accident, and that the real cost of opening that door was only beginning to show itself. Morning arrived without ceremony. It crept in low and pale, slipping through the seams of the barn like water, finding a crack. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt provisional, as if the land itself were waiting to see what would happen next. The farmer straightened from his stool, joints stiff, and took in the scene with clearer eyes. In daylight, there was no mistaking the condition of the foals. What the dark had softened, the dawn made plain. Their coats were patchy and dull, rubbed thin at the shoulders and hips. Two bore faint brands, crooked and uneven, burned into skin that had not yet finished growing. One limped when it shifted its weight. Another flinched when he reached too quickly, even with an open hand. He crouched beside them, careful, counting breaths, counting ribs. He had raised horses long enough to know neglect when he saw it. This wasn't the result of a hard winter alone. This was something older, something decided. The mare watched him closely as he moved among them. In the fuller light, her size was even more striking, a solid wall of muscle and bone, scarred in places that spoke of harness and long labor. There was a notch missing from one ear, old and healed. When a foal strayed too far from the group, she shifted, subtle but firm, guiding it back with her shoulder. It wasn't possessive. It was practiced. He noticed then the way the foals responded to her voice, a low sound he felt more than heard. They stilled when she did. They followed when she moved. It struck him, with a suddenness that made him sit back on his heels, that this had not been chaos. It had been direction. He fetched his phone from his coat pocket, the screen lighting up his cracked knuckles. There was one call he trusted in situations like this. The veterinarian answered on the third ring, voice rough with sleep. The farmer kept his words plain, gave no embellishment. He didn't need to. There was a pause on the other end of the line that told him enough. "I'll come out," the vet said finally. "But I can tell you now, those foals didn't just wander." While he waited, the farmer walked the fence line, following the tracks half buried by drifting snow. They led away from the road, not toward it, cutting across fields that had been posted and abandoned. He found places where the wire had been forced down, not broken by accident, but pressed and held until it gave. There were old tire marks near one gate, frozen now, the treads worn thin. By the time the vet arrived, the sun had climbed higher, lighting the valley in a washed-out gold. She moved quietly through the barn, her hands sure, her face tightening as she checked teeth and joints. When she straightened, she didn't look at the farmer right away. "These came from the breeding yards up north," she said at last. "The big operation by the highway. They've been cutting costs. Too many mouths, not enough buyers." He felt the words settle like weight. He knew the place. Everyone did. Rows of fences, numbers instead of names. Horses moved through like grain. "They shouldn't have been moved in this weather," he said. "They shouldn't have been moved at all," she replied. "Not like this." They stood there a moment longer, listening to the sound of chewing, of water lapping softly in the buckets. Outside, a truck passed on the distant road, its engine fading quickly. Life elsewhere went on. Word traveled faster than he expected. By afternoon, a neighbor stopped by, then another. Some came with concern, others with questions edged sharp enough to cut. Someone mentioned the authorities. Someone else mentioned fines. A man from down the valley shook his head and said it wasn't worth the trouble, not with feed prices the way they were. The farmer listened without arguing. He had learned that explanations rarely changed anyone's mind. When the talk turned to what he ought to do, he looked back toward the barn. The mare stood in the doorway now, half in shadow, half in light. The foals clustered behind her, a line of small heads visible beneath her barrel chest. Later that day, an official truck pulled into the yard. The man who stepped out wore a clean jacket and carried a clipboard. He asked questions in a voice that suggested he already knew the answers. The farmer told him what he had seen, what he had done. The man wrote, nodded, frowned. "Technically," he said, "these animals are property. There's a process. And if I follow it," the farmer asked, "where do they go?" The man hesitated. "Back." The words sat between them, heavy and unfinished. That evening, after the truck was gone and the light had begun to fail again, the farmer returned to the barn alone. He leaned against the doorframe, listening. The mare turned her head and met his gaze. In the quiet, he noticed something he had missed before, a faint scar along her flank, long and narrow, the kind left by a wire fence pulled too tight. It came to him then, not as a thought, but as a certainty. She had been there before. She had lost something there. And when the time came, she had remembered this place. The open land. The man who did not hurry his hands. The barn that meant warmth instead of confinement. She had not wandered. She had led. The realization did not feel triumphant. It felt sobering. The farmer understood now that whatever decision lay ahead would not end with a single night of shelter. Systems did not like to be challenged quietly. Kindness, when it interrupted profit, had a way of drawing attention. Outside, the sun slipped behind the hills, and the temperature began its steady fall. Inside the barn, 8 foals shifted closer together, and the mare stood firm at their edge, her shadow stretching long across the straw. The farmer remained where he was, knowing that by morning, standing still would no longer be an option. The cold sharpened just before dawn, the kind that settled into the bones and made the world feel briefly unforgiving again. The farmer was awake when the light began to change, standing in the barn with his coat buttoned high, listening to the slow, steady breath of 9 horses sharing one space. Outside, frost silvered the fence posts. Inside, warmth held, earned and fragile. The mare stood where she had all night, angled toward the door. In the growing light, her size filled the space without effort. The foals stirred as the sky paled, blinking, stretching stiff legs, pressing instinctively against her. When one stumbled, she shifted just enough to brace it. There was nothing sentimental in the movement. It was work. The sound of tires on gravel cut through the quiet. The mare's ears flicked forward. The farmer did not move at first. He had known this moment was coming. He had felt it settle into him sometime after midnight, when the barn had finally gone still and he realized he was past the point of turning back. 2 trucks stopped in the yard this time. One bore the familiar seal of the county. The other was newer, polished, its logo clean and deliberate. Men stepped out, collars turned up, breath fogging. The official from the day before nodded stiffly. The man from the breeding operation did not nod at all. They spoke inside the barn, voices kept low but firm. Paperwork came out. Clipboards again. The man from the operation talked about ownership, about losses, about procedures that had been misunderstood. He did not look at the foals when he spoke. He looked at the mare once, briefly, then away. The farmer listened until there was a break. Then he reached into his coat and unfolded a set of photographs. He laid them out on an upturned feed bin. Fence lines pressed down. Rope burns. Tire tracks leading nowhere good. The vet's notes, signed and dated. The official leaned, and despite himself, the other man's jaw tightened. She led them, the farmer said quietly, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. She knew where she was going. That's not, the man began. She'd been here before, the farmer went on. You miss the scar? You miss a lot when you don't look. The mare chose that moment to step forward. She did not charge. She did not threaten. She placed herself between the men and the foals, her body a statement that required no translation. One of the foals nickered softly and tucked its head against her leg. Silence followed, heavy and unavoidable. The official cleared his throat. He looked at the papers again, then at the horses, then out toward the pale strip of sunrise breaking over the hills. There's enough here, he said slowly, to warrant an investigation. At minimum, the man from the operation protested, his words quicker now, edged with irritation. But the tone had shifted. Systems relied on quiet, on people looking away. This had become visible. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the decision had been made. The foals would not be moved. Not today. Not back. Temporary custody was granted pending review. The words were dry, bureaucratic, but the meaning landed with weight. The trucks pulled away one by one. The yard fell quiet again. The farmer remained where he was long after, leaning against the stall rail. His hands shook then, the delayed cost of holding himself together. He let it happen. The mare turned her head and regarded him, her dark eyes steady. In the new light, the barn looked different, less like a shelter borrowed from the night, more like something claimed. Over the weeks that followed, things changed in small, stubborn increments. Feed arrived from places he hadn't expected. Calls came in, not all of them friendly, but enough were. The investigation widened. Papers were filed. Fences elsewhere were cut open, not by animals, but by people finally looking. The foals filled out. Their coats began to shine. The limp eased. One morning, the smallest chestnut broke into an awkward, joyful run down the length of the pasture, the others following, their hooves drumming a rhythm that carried all the way back to the house. The mare watched from the fence line, ears forward, satisfied. She did not cross it. She did not need to. On a clear morning much like the first, the farmer stood in the barn doorway again, sunlight warming the boards at his back. The cold had loosened its grip. The ledger on the kitchen table still wasn't perfect, but it no longer felt like a verdict. He had learned something he hadn't known he was missing, that doing the right thing rarely made life easier, but it made it truer. The mare lifted her head and breathed in the air, long and deep. The foals clustered around her, safe, alive, unremarkable in the way that mattered most. The farmer rested his hand on the doorframe and watched them, understanding at last why they had come. Not because he was special, not because the barn was warm, but because, once before, he had opened a door and meant it. Some lessons arrive quietly, carried through the cold by those with no voice at all. And once learned, they do not let you go.